In this video, I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about how to grow your quads. The quads consist of four muscles: the vastus medialis on the inside of the thigh, the vastus lateralis on the outside of the thigh, the vastus intermedius deeper in the middle of the thigh, and the rectus femoris that sits over the top. All four muscles insert on the tibial tuberosity via the patellar tendon and act to extend or straighten the knee. The three vasti muscles originate from the thigh, whereas the rectus femoris originates up at the hip. Therefore, the rectus femoris also flexes the hip. Most people are aware that if you want to increase the strength and size of your quads, you should incorporate exercises like squats, split squats, and the leg press because they involve knee extension, which is the primary action of the quads. However, research by Emma et al. In 2016 and Vygotsky and Bryanton in 2016 demonstrate that the rectus femoris provides little contribution to compound movements that require simultaneous knee and hip extension. Additionally, a paper by Kubo et al. In 2019 found no growth of the rectus femoris in untrained lifters after 10 weeks of squat training. On the other hand, a study by Mayo et al. In 2018 and Zabaleta Corda et al. In 2021 have shown that seated leg extensions cause preferential hypertrophy of the rectus femoris. Therefore, maximizing quad strength and muscle growth requires multi-joint exercises like squats in which the hips and knees are extending, as well as single joint exercises like seated leg extensions in which only the knees are extending. I'll talk about both in depth, but let's start by reviewing the preferred technique for compound exercises. Regardless of the compound exercise you choose to perform, there are usually two guidelines you want to follow if your goal is quad hypertrophy. 1. Strive to maintain an upright posture, and 2. Aim for as much knee flexion as possible without sacrificing your overall technique. Combining these cues ensures that you are loading the quads, specifically the three vasti muscles, in their lengthened position and distributing the external load in such a way that challenges your quads more than your glutes. For example, a low bar back squat places a greater emphasis on your glutes, while a heels elevated front squat places a greater emphasis on your quads because of the angles of your torso and knees and the location of the weight relative to your knees. Keep in mind that, in general, more knee flexion is better than less, but where the maximum benefit occurs is unknown. For instance, a study by Bloomquist et al. In 2013 found that a deep squat to 120 degrees of knee flexion led to more quad growth than a shallow squat to 60 degrees of knee flexion. However, we cannot necessarily infer that a squat to 130 degrees would lead to even more quad growth than the squat to 120 degrees. This is why I said to strive for as much knee flexion as possible without sacrificing your overall technique. Remember that these are guidelines. They need to be applied within reason while still taking the rest of your training program into consideration. Arguably, the most well-known compound exercise is the squat, which includes options like the goblet squat, front squat, and back squat. The back squat can be further subdivided into high bar and low bar variations. This refers to the position of the bar relative to your shoulders. Of the two, a high bar squat will typically allow you to maintain a more upright position, which, as I just described, is beneficial for loading the quads. If we're purely discussing quad hypertrophy, there are potential limitations with each option. For goblet squats, your arms will likely fatigue before your quads. For barbell front squats, your upper back may fatigue first. And for barbell back squats, your lower back might be the limiting factor. None of this is wrong or bad. This video is about how to grow your quads, so if they are not the muscles approaching failure with each set, this may limit the stimulus for muscle growth. An example in the upper body would be using chin-ups to grow your back muscles, but your biceps always fatiguing first. Your back will grow, but additional exercises may be necessary to maximize growth. If that's not a concern for you, these small nuances probably don't matter, especially if you're performing a comprehensive training program that includes the isolation exercises I'm going to describe later. Since your anatomy and range of motion can influence what your squat looks like, The easiest way to modify your technique so you can sit deeper with a more upright trunk is to elevate your heels using Olympic weightlifting shoes, weight plates, or wedges. Coming from someone who mostly wears minimalist shoes, I promise this isn't cheating. The Smith machine is also a great choice because it reduces the complexity of the movement and gives you the ability to position yourself in a way that's more favorable for loading your quads. Machines also aren't cheating, as a recent systematic review and meta-analysis found that they are just as beneficial as free weights for improving muscle growth. This is part of the reason why hack squats, pendulum squats, and belt squats are top-tier options if they're available to you. And from the perspective of a physical therapist, these can be really useful during rehabilitation when you want to continue training the squat pattern while reducing the relative contribution from your hips or low back if either area is symptomatic. Be aware that not all hack squats are created equal, as some machines force you into a forward trunk lean. Similarly, not all leg press machines are created the same. If possible, adjust the backrest so the angle between the seat and backrest is greater, allowing you to start the movement in less hip flexion. You should also position your feet lower on the platform to promote more knee flexion range of motion throughout the movement. For all of the options up to this point, you can play with your stance width and the turnout of your feet as long as neither one is excessive. Ideally, they should both assist with the goal of achieving adequate knee flexion and staying upright when applicable. An option that I haven't mentioned yet is the split squat. It's one of my personal favorites because there are so many variations to choose from, and you're better able to control each individual joint position. You can do regular split squats, front foot elevated split squats, deficit split squats, rear foot elevated split squats, or deficit rear foot elevated split squats. The deficit rear foot elevated split squats have been a staple for me, but be warned, they are absolutely brutal. Once again, with whatever option you choose, you're striving for full knee flexion and an upright trunk without exaggerating either to the point that you sacrifice your overall technique. For any variation, you can use a barbell, Smith machine, dumbbells in both hands, or a dumbbell in one hand. If using a dumbbell in one hand, you can hold on to something for balance if needed. Lunges, step downs, and other similar exercises are all viable options as well, as long as your balance and coordination aren't significantly limiting your ability to produce force. If for whatever reason you're worried about missing out on glute gains, you can watch our video on how to grow your glutes, ignore the subtle nuances in technique like I mentioned earlier, or understand that a well-rounded program will also focus on hip extension biased movements such as Romanian deadlifts, and I'll expand on this later with regards to programming. Last thing to mention in this section, if you're wondering about my recommendations for training at home, the split squat is an excellent choice for people with minimal equipment. Okay, let's move on to the isolation exercises, which are key for the growth of the rectus femoris. These are also referred to as single joint exercises because the intention is for only the knees to be flexing and extending. The most well-known option is the seated leg extension. Although it's usually performed with 2 legs at a time, it can be done unilaterally. The goal of achieving as much knee flexion as possible to train the quads in a more lengthened position remains the same here. Some machines may limit you to only about 90 degrees of knee flexion, so if you want to try to increase that, you can place a foam pad, yoga blocks, or a folded up yoga mat between your shins and the padding of the machine. Focus on a controlled tempo, especially when lowering the weight toward the bottom half of the range of motion. A recent study by Larson et al. Assessed how the position of the hip, whether being in a more flexed or extended position, influences hypertrophy. The researchers found that rectus femoris muscle hypertrophy was greater with 40 degrees of hip flexion compared to 90 degrees of hip flexion, with no differences between legs for vastus lateralis hypertrophy. They hypothesized that the greater hypertrophy seen in the rectus femoris at 40 degrees of hip flexion was due to training it in a more lengthened position. On the other hand, there was no significant difference in the vastus lateralis because changing the angle of the hip has no influence on the length of any of the vasti muscles. You don't necessarily have to take this finding to the extreme. Try moving the seat back and leaning back instead of leaning forward. While I'm on the topic of leg extensions, I want to point out that they are completely safe and cause no more stress on your knees than squats, especially when considering relative loads. If for some reason the top range of motion is uncomfortable, try using a partial range of motion. Research by Pedrosa et al. In 2022 found that long-length partials are just as effective, if not more effective, at promoting hypertrophy than full range of motion training, and this has become a general trend in the research. For people training at home, this is why I'm a fan of setting up a long, heavy resistance band in such a way that you're unable to fully straighten your knee due to the high tension and then performing partial repetitions. If that's too difficult to set up, you can perform an isometric contraction using a belt, band, or some other object with minimal give to it. A systematic review by Orenchuk et al. In 2019 found that isometric training at longer muscle lengths produced greater muscular hypertrophy when compared to equal volumes of shorter muscle length training. Both options are done unilaterally and, if desired, can be performed flat on your back to put your hips in a more extended position. A more popular option as of late is the reverse Nordic. Prior to initiating the exercise, determine if you're able to sit back on your heels without pain. If you can't kneel comfortably, achieve full pain-free knee flexion range of motion, or put weight through the top of your feet and ankles in a plantar flexed position without significant discomfort, you likely want to work on those prerequisites first. Other than that, the setup for the reverse Nordic is pretty straightforward. Kneel on a soft surface, such as a pad, pillow, or towel, with your knees roughly hip width apart or greater. A soft object may be placed under the ankles for additional comfort. To perform the exercise, begin by squeezing your glutes and bracing your abs with your hands by your sides. While maintaining a straight line between your knees, hips, and shoulders, slowly lean back as far as you can comfortably control before returning to the starting position. If you want a safety net, external feedback, or an objective measure of progress, place a bench, couch, plyo boxes, pads, or whatever else available behind you. To progress the exercise, gradually increase the range of motion. To regress the exercise, decrease the range of motion as needed. If you want assistance, you can use a band anchored to a sturdy object. However, don't overly rely on it. You should still be performing the majority of the work. Similar to a Nordic hamstring curl, you can also just complete the lowering phase and reset after each repetition. Regardless of the variation you choose to perform, focus on slow and controlled repetitions. Don't sacrifice technique for a slight increase in range of motion. The last option I'm going to demonstrate in this section is the sissy squat, named after King Sisyphus from Greek mythology, not because it's easy. It's similar to the reverse Nordic in that you are trying to keep your trunk braced and hips extended throughout the movement. Since there is a balance component, I recommend holding onto something to the side of you or in front of you, like a squat rack or a rope attached to a cable column. You can also use the Smith machine, which has the added benefit of being able to add weight if needed. If you lack sufficient range of motion in your big toes, sissy squats might not be for you. One of the biggest mistakes people make when training their legs is having unnecessary redundancy in their program. You don't need to perform barbell back squats, dumbbell split squats, the leg press, and bodyweight lunges to failure for 5 sets each all in one day. If you're a beginner doing full body resistance training twice per week, you might choose to do 3 to 4 sets of barbell back squats on one day and 3 to 4 sets of seated leg extensions the other day. To round out your training, you could include Romanian deadlifts, seated leg curls, calf raises, upper body pushing and pulling exercises, and any accessory movements you wanted to perform. If you're an intermediate lifter doing full body resistance training 3 times per week, you might do 3 to 4 sets of hack squats on Monday, 3 to 4 sets of seated leg extensions on Wednesday, and 3 to 4 sets of rear foot elevated split squats on Friday, along with additional lower and upper body exercises. If you're an advanced lifter training your legs twice per week, you might do 3 to 4 sets of hack squats and 3 sets of seated leg extensions on Monday, and then 3 to 4 sets of deficit rear foot elevated split squats and 3 sets of reverse Nordics on Thursday. To cover your glutes, hamstrings, adductors, and calves, you'd also include exercises like RDLs, hamstring curls, calf raises, etc. There are unlimited possibilities. How often you train, how many sets you do per week, and the number of exercises you choose to perform per session will depend on your training experience, goals, and other factors. Part of good programming is getting the most out of the least effort. People often do the opposite by trying to do as much as possible as quickly as possible, but change takes time. Start with fewer exercises and less sets per week, and gradually do more only as needed. Part of this concept of doing more over time, often referred to as progressive overload, ties into another training mistake that is associated with your intensity or effort. It's not uncommon for people to primarily focus on the burn or the pump by only doing high repetition sets with short rest periods. This is fine in some scenarios, but it helps to know that you're getting stronger by doing more repetitions and adding more weight over time. If you're someone who loves the pump or feeling exhausted at the end of each workout, just finish with one really hard set. For example, if you really feel the need to do so, you can burn out with a set of heels elevated goblet squats for 20 repetitions. On that note, most exercises can be performed in the 5 to 20 rep range. If you're doing heavy compound movements such as barbell back squats, you might stick to the lower end of that repetition range. On the other hand, if you're doing seated leg extensions, it's okay to work toward the higher end of that repetition range. The main goal is that you're pushing to at least a few reps shy of failure on most exercises and getting stronger over months and years. If you do perform really high rep ranges, just know that you probably have to push beyond discomfort because that initial burn is likely when each repetition becomes more valuable for growth. What about your VMO? Do you need to worry about it? No. You can't isolate the VMO, and its importance for knee pain has been vastly exaggerated. If you want strong, well-developed quads, whether it's for training or rehab, do these 5 things. 1. Train with a variety of exercises. 2. Train through a full range of motion. 3. Use sufficient intensity or effort. 4. Gradually progress range of motion, weight, reps, etc. And 5. Do this for weeks, months, and years. Can you preferentially activate or emphasize the vastus medialis? Maybe, but you'll be covered if you follow the 5 principles just mentioned. In summary, the quads consist of 4 muscles: the vastus medialis, the vastus lateralis, the vastus intermedius, and the rectus femoris. The 3 vasti muscles originate from the thigh, whereas the rectus femoris originates up at the hip. All 4 muscles act to extend or straighten the knee, while the rectus femoris also flexes the hip. Research demonstrates that the rectus femoris provides little contribution to compound movements that require simultaneous knee and hip extension. Therefore, maximizing quad strength and muscle growth requires multi-joint exercises like squats or split squats in which the hips and knees are extending, as well as single joint exercises like seated leg extensions, reverse Nordics, or sissy squats in which only the knees are extending. Other than that, if you're training at least 2 to 3 times per week, focusing on good technique, and prioritizing progressive overload, you're on your way to reaching your goals. And if you've been concerned about activating your VMO, don't be. You don't need to do anything special. Just follow the guidelines in this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe, turn on notifications, and leave any comments down below. If you are looking for a rehab or performance program, or you're interested in working with us one-on-one, visit our website at e3rehab.com. Peace.